Hey there guys, what's going on? I welcome you to this new video, M365 email authentication. The reason I'm making this video is to give clarity about how SPF, DKIM and DMARC records actually work. I see a lot of confusion even with the colleagues of mine, some juniors, they have some confusion about SPF and DMARC and these records for email authentication. So let's understand step by step what these records are and how they actually work with a practical example. Now, these records are actually authentication methods that helps in proving the legitimacy of the email as well as the sender. Let's talk about the SPF record. SPF stands for Sender Policy Framework. Now, it is a DNS text record which contains information about all the servers that are valid for sending an email on behalf of a domain. So that record may contain IP addresses of the server or a DNS name that would point to another IP address. So basically, this SPF record contains information about the sending servers, which are actually valid senders for a domain. For instance, Gmail would have a SPF record that has all the sending servers. It may contain the IP addresses or DNS names. We will see that in the next slide. Let's talk about how the SPF record looks like. Now the SPF record looks like something like this. Let's break it down. V equals SPF1 tells the DNS record that it is a type of SPF record. Although we are making a text record, but this V equals SPF1 designates that it is a SPF record. Next, valid email sources. This will contain all the IP addresses or the DNS names that you are sending emails from. So for example, I may be sending emails from my Exchange online, or users might be sending those emails, but I do have another print server or print to scan or another application that might be sending emails on behalf of my domain. So what I will do is I will include that application's or device's IP address here so that when the recipient receives that email, the recipient server can verify it as a valid sender. If I do not include that IP address, then the SPF will fail and the email might end up in the junk folder of the recipient. Next is the enforcement rule. Now, enforcement rule defines what action should be taken by the recipient server in case of an SPF fail. Let's recap. V is equal to SPF1 tells DNS to identify that as a SPF record. Now you will define a valid email sources. Here is the enforcement rule valid values. Remember that these are all suggestions to the recipient server. What actually happens to the recipient server depends upon the policy defined by the administrator at the recipient side. Now we have three valid values. One is hard fail, second is soft fail, and the last one is neutral. So these are the suggestions. For the hard fail, reject the message. For the soft fail, move the email to junk, and neutral says no specific actions. But overall, these are just suggestions. What happens is totally on the recipient server side. Here's a typical SPF record that you will update as a TXT record, and we will also see that later in the video how we can update this. Now this is a SPF record, typical SPF record I would say that M365 gives us when we add a domain. One more thing, the spf.protection.outlook.com, this is actually another name, and it contains, let's say, all the IP addresses that Microsoft would be using to send the emails from. Let's understand SPF workflow, or how the recipient server identifies the SPF record. Let's say that this is my SPF record. I have an IP, actually two IP addresses, and I have defined my enforcement policy as hard fail. And I will update this SPF record to the DNS server. Next, let's say that I have an email server which has an IP address of 192.168.0.10, and I have a destination email server or the recipient server which will receive this email. Let's say that I send this email to the destination server. What happens next is the destination server will perform a SPF check on the domain that is in the email header. So let's say if my domain is let's say gmail.com, now this will run a SPF check against that gmail.com domain. If it finds the SPF record and there is an IP address of 192.168.0.10 in the DNS server, or basically in the SPF record that's stored in the DNS server, then it will be marked as a valid sender and the SPF will be passed. If the IP address is not found, then this destination server will mark that sender as a non-valid sender and SPF will fail. Next, let's talk about DKIM. Stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail. Now, DKIM is simply another text or a CNAME record which basically adds a signature to the email header and the email body. So what happens is we have two keys here, public and private. The private key is not exposed to the outside world, but the email server or the email provider will use that private key to sign the email. So let's understand the flow here. The email server or the provider will have a private key and a public key. You as an administrator need to update your public key in the DNS server as a TXT or a CNAME record. When a user sends an email from the server, the email server signs the email header and the body of that email using the private key. When the destination server receives that email, it performs a DKIM check. In other words, it checks for a public key which can actually verifies the signature. Since the private key is not exposed anywhere else and only public key is, and public key can verify the signature. When the signature is verified, you will say that DKIM is passed. So what does it actually do for us? First, it makes sure that the email while in transmit was not tampered with, because you can have intermediary email servers while between the destination and the sender. As long as those intermediary servers do not tamper the email, then email signature will be verified or DKIM will be passed. So in that sense, you can say that the email was not tampered with and the public key is able to kind of verify or decrypt the signature that was signed by the private key. And that's how the recipient will receive the email and we will have DKIM as passed. Let's break down the DNS record for DKIM. Now, the records that you see here are two DNS records for DKIM. These can be either text record or a CNAME record. The benefit with the CNAME record is that you can rotate the public-private key pair without changing your DNS records. So this gives us the benefit over a text record. And as a best practice, we should update our or rotate the key on a regular basis or periodically. Now, Let's talk about these host name, I'm sorry. So there are two DNS records that Microsoft 365 gives us for updating it to the DNS server. However, only one of them is valid or say active at a time, usually the first one. So the host name will always be selector1, selector2 under dot underscore domain key, and then it will always point to your custom domain. Let's say I have a domain ramanlodhi.in and then domain key and then initial domain. So initial domain here is your dot on Microsoft domain, or in other words, it's also known as Moira domain. So this is basically what DNS record for the DKIM looks like. We will see that in practical also. Now talking about selector 2 or another DKIM record, this is usually inactive and becomes active only after you rotate the keys and the selector 1 domain key or selector 1 DKIM record is inactive. Now the big question is, are SPF and DKIM enough? The short answer is no. The long answer is, well, there is a reason. By design or how SPF and DKIM work, they do not equate from and mail from address. In other words, they don't require to match from and mail from address in order to pass themselves. So they will never ever uh, check whether from and mail from addresses are same. Next thing is that scammers, they can easily pass the SPF check. They might as well pass the DKIM record by uh, creating their own records for that matter, and they can easily change the from address. The from address is the one which you guys see when you receive an email, and mail from is the return path that is available only if you choose to see the message header. Now, this is where DMARC comes into picture. As a recap, we know that SPF and DKIM will never make sure that these mail from and from addresses are same. Let's see how DMARC helps us in this scenario. Now, DMARC stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting and Conformance. DMARC basically is an alignment between SPF and DKIM, and it makes sure that these addresses are same. All these things, SPF, DMARC and DKIM, we will see how they actually work in an actual example. First, let's understand that the DMARC text record, how it looks like. So this is the basic syntax. Let's understand this. Now hostname will always be underscore DMARC, and the text value again v equals DMARC1 is telling that this is a DMARC address, or treat it as a DMARC record. Next is the DMARC policy. So DMARC policy here, it defines what to do when the DMARC fails or the DMARC check fails. So what should the recipient server do? You have three options: do nothing, reject, and quarantine. Next is you're telling the percentage of DMARC failed mail subject to DMARC policy. So you're telling the recipient server how many emails that fail DMARC gets them the policy applied to them. So if you're testing or if you have just updated your record, it's good to have 50% there so that you can get the reports, and once you're like satisfied with everything, you can make it 100%. Next is the DMARC reports. Here you define the email address for the aggregate report that you will see for the DMARC policy. So the report will contain information about how many emails passed the DMARC check, how many or what domains were used to send emails that failed the DMARC check. So as per those reports, you can take your actions and change your policy as needed. Here quickly, I want to talk about how to get or where to get these records from when you add a domain. Most of you who are working as an administrator will know about these things, but just to show you a quick recap, so what do we do is when we add a domain, we go to settings and click on domains, and we add a domain here. So let's say recently I added ramanlodhi.in, and while adding the domain, the 365 will give you options to update these records. So let's say this is the text record that you see on the screen that I have added. This is the MX record that I've added for receiving emails, and this is the CNAME for the obviously for the auto discover. Here you won't find the DKIM record, but before that, those of you who don't know how to check SPF record or any other record, you have two options. You can see it or look for it online using a tool called MX Toolbox, or you can also use your command prompt and do a quick NS lookup query to find that. So I'll do NS lookup, and let's say I want to find the text record. So I will set my query to text, and then I will enter the domain name. So here is my SPF record that I have updated to my DNS server. Next is again, you can use your MX Toolbox online. Just Google MX Toolbox, enter your domain, and get all the records you want. Now, what if I want to update my DKIM record? So for that, you need to go to Defender, and then you need to go to threat intelligence, not threat intelligence, but threat policies. And you need to go to email authentication settings. Once you come here, click on DKIM. Now, for this domain ramanlodhi.in, I have already updated my records and enabled this so that whenever a user is sending out an email using this domain, it will get signed with the private key. Here you also have a rotate DKIM keys option. Now, let's say that I have this domain that I don't have updated the records for. So the process is that first I will click on create DKIM keys. Now it's gonna take some time. Okay, there you have it. Now I have these two records, right? What I'll do is I'll go to my DNS server for raman.tk or DNS provider, and I will create these two records, right, for my domain. So sorry. So if you see, like I showed you in the PPT, so this is the selector one. This is same for every record, selector one, selector two. But the important part is this: selector one and my custom domain, which is raman.tk, and domain key as it is, then my Moira domain or my .on Microsoft domain, which is the initial domain. So this is the syntax for DKIM. Now, once I have it, I will copy these records, head over to my DNS server for raman.tk. Once my DNS records are published and updated and synced, I can simply click on enable this. Right now, it will show me error because I have not updated that. So that's expected. Right, this will be the error that it did not find the records there in the DNS server. So that's fine. But I have updated the records for this one. So my DKIM should be passed now. Let me head over to my Hostinger DNS provider where I have purchased this domain from ramanlodhi.in. All right, so okay, let's see. I'll click on manage. Then just wanted to show you the records that I have updated. Okay, so here you see that these are my DKIM records. And here is my DMARC record. So if you are following up with the PPT, this is the name _DMARC. This is same for all domains. V equal to DMARC 1, P equal to quarantine. I'm telling the recipient server this, if there's a DMARC fail, quarantine the message, but ultimately it will depend upon the recipient server, what it need to do, how aggressive their policy is set to. But most probably it will be quarantine. PCT equal to 100, I'm defining that 50% of those emails that fail DMARC check, they get the policy applied, let's say quarantine, which I have defined. Slowly you can change it to 100. So you will be telling the recipient server that 100% of these emails that fail the DMARC check, they get DMARC policy applied to them. Now this is the email address. The first one that you see, this one, I'm sorry, this one. So this one is for the aggregated emails for the report for the DMARC, and this is for the forensic reports. Both the emails are used for reporting purposes. So that's what I wanted to tell you about how you can update your records. There's a Microsoft article for updating DMARC record as well, but more or less it has nothing much to it. This is a simple record and you can update it. Now this is time to test all the three records, and we will understand how DMARC alignment works, how it will verify mail from address. So I am here on my ramanlodhi.in test account. I will create a new email and send it to a Gmail account. And from that account, we will check the header and verify that everything is passed. Now, one more thing I wanted to point out is that when I will send this email, the email server will use the private key and it will sign the email header like the to, from, subject and the email body separately. We will see that in the header how a DKIM signature will look like. Okay, let's hit send. I have received this email. Now I will collect the header. So for Gmail, what you can do is click on show original, copy to clipboard, and I will head over to my message header analyzer, delete this header, paste the new header and analyze. Let's understand all three records step by step. First, what we can do, we can just check here itself whether SPF got passed or not. So if you just come to authentication results or here on the number 8th row, you can see that SPF passed and this IP address is designated as a permitted center. So if you remember, the Microsoft defines a domain name in its SPF record, and that domain name may point to several other IP addresses which be sending emails. So for instance here, if we see finally the thing that so let's understand this now, how the email sending and receiving works. So internally I sent an email from my let's say it's from the Exchange server, right? And it had multiple hops in between, and finally it reached this IND01 server. What is this? It's basically, if you look closely, there is a OBE.outbound. What is OBE? This OBE is outbound edge. Now this outbound edge is making a contact with MX or let's say mx.google.com, which is the MX record or the email server recipient for Gmail. Now this is called the connecting IP. The IP which is finally getting connected to the recipient server, that is called the CIP. Now the CIP needs to pass the SPF check, and it is passing the SPF check here. If you see under authentication results also, you can see that DKIM got passed and then SPF also passed. right? So these are the things for DKIM and SPF. Let's check the DKIM signature once. This is the signature that the email got signed with. All right, the email header got signed with the private key. So this is the signature. Now this signature needs to be verified with the public key, and it got verified and we had it passed here in the authentication results. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is DMARC. Now, how DMARC alignment will work? First of all, DMARC will check the domain in the from address, which is ramanlodhi.in, right? Next, it will check the return path. So I'll do return now here. It will check the domain in the return path, right? Now those two things got matched. So all good. There is a third thing that it will check in the DKIM signature. Under DKIM signature, it will check for, let me zoom it out a bit, D equal to ramanlodhi.in. So it is making sure that those mail from address also matches with the domain that is claiming to sign the email, and the domain which is claiming to sign this email is d equals ramanlodhi.in. So this looks for this tag called d equals, and this also should match with both mail from and from addresses. So that's how DKIM alignment works.